Hi all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I actually want to talk to you about how do you actually pay for graduate school and the living expenses for graduate school. So, and whether you can actually find fully funded PhD programs around the world, right? So if you don't know, I'm actually a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity platform because there were so many people that helped me out along the way in becoming a professor that I just wanted to give back as much as I possibly can. So I created the proofreading sharing economy proofreading platform, and I started putting out these videos because I realized that there was lots of people that didn't know how to navigate this sort of process in terms of actually getting into graduate school and becoming sort of research active. So I thought I'd actually put this stuff out there just to help out as many people as I possibly can. So how do you actually get into graduate school? And have all of your living expenses paid for by different sources and stuff like that. There's actually turns out to be, if you are going through the research route, there is a fair number of different resources out there that you can pursue to get a PhD, particularly in business administration or something along those lines. Turns out that it is, if you can get into the particular programs and stuff, then there are a lot of sources of funding that you could sort of look into in terms of getting a fully funded PhD program. Now, when I'm talking about fully funded, I'm not talking about that you're going to be absolutely wealthy, right? I'm talking about just enough of a stipend that you actually survive and you can pay for, maybe it's an apartment, and maybe you have enough just to pay for your food and just sort of general living expenses. You are still basically living under the poverty line. If you do a PhD, if you're doing a PhD and you look at the incomes, it's for most people, unless you're at some an unusual place and you have an unusual scholarship, then most of you are going to be living below the poverty line in terms of the income that you're going to be making. And actually, that was part of the reason why I did the whole reciprocity project, is I knew that there was tons of people out there that could use something like this. And I myself and my friends and colleagues and stuff like that went through graduate school, that was us. We had to deal with this kind of stuff. So now that I'm on the other side, I thought I'd have, now that I had the opportunity to, I'd love to give back and stuff like that. So, the first thing that I would sort of think about with doing, how do you actually pay for graduate school in a business program or wherever it is, right? Any particular business, any particular program, doesn't matter if it's sociology, economics, if it is engineering, just only apply to those institutions that actually have doctoral funding. And that's going to solve the vast majority of your problems, because most of those schools are the legitimate schools that are pretty well known. And, that's going to solve most of your problems if you only apply to those ones, because then you're not going to have to pay a large amount of money. And generally, any of these sort of research routes, the tuition is not terribly expensive, right? So once you do, if you did an MBA at Harvard, for example, which there's tons of people that do that kind of stuff, the PhD is not nearly as expensive as the MBA. They're way different in terms of what the tuition is, and then a lot of programs will just they'll pay a little bit for you to be in there. There'll be a PhD stipend that will pay for just enough, right? And the other thing that's important when you're going about this route is to ask whether they have 5-year funding. So a lot will have maybe 3. So I know in the UK, if I believe that they'll have 3 years funding. And, in American schools, in Canadian schools, the norm was 4 years, but now it's moving towards 5 years, because it does take a lot longer to actually get a PhD than, to actually get in the job market and be successful. It does take a long time. And so most people are looking towards 5 years. So having that 5-year funding is important. So you want to look into that and whether they have that. That's going to ultimately help you with the decision. The other thing is to look for government grants and scholarships. Actually, that's how I funded most of my PhD. Is I actually went through and I had an Ontario graduate scholarship for lots of it. Then I got a national scholarship in Canada. I'm Canadian. And it was a SHIRK grant, and it's a wonderful program that they have. And I know most places, so in the US, there'll be the NSF grants. It's pretty hard to get, but they're possible. You can also get, ones from different sort of private sources or foundations. The U.S. is set up with a lot of foundations. There's lots of different foundations out there that you can look into. I believe the Ford Foundation has one. I'm slipping my mind. There's one for innovation. And I want to say, I'm blanking, and you can look at one way to find those particular ones. So you just go to universities and the faculty at certain universities, and you look at their resumes and see, or their CVs. They're called CVs in graduate school, if you didn't know. So resumes, and you look to see where they got their fellowships and scholarships and stuff. So for this innovation one, go to MIT and look at their faculty that they have. A couple of them I know have this particular one. And they're great. It's a great program that you can get. There's also Industry Studies has a fellowship that's associated with it, so you can look at that. And I know every single program has this kind of stuff. You can look at those particular ones that are geared towards that. And then in the UK and in Finland and Sweden and all those kind of places, they have those kind of programs as well. So you might want to look into them to help you get through graduate school. The other thing that you might want to look into, particularly in the United States, and you might want to look into these military grants that you can get. So they'll put you through I think they'll only pay for 3 or 4 years, though. That's the trouble. But they'll fully fund everything. And then you have to serve in the military. But generally, if you're doing that, a couple of people that I do know that did that, they'll end up serving in sort of officer roles or sort of, desk roles, paper roles, right? They're shuffling paper around because that's really what you learn in a PhD. You're not probably going to be in the field. So you are going to be shuffling paperwork around. So the U.S. government has a pretty good program with that. But they're going to expect you, or the other thing that you do, sometimes you'll go and work at the U.S. Air Force Academy or the U.S. Navy Academy. There's one faculty member that I know that's there, and you could just go to those different places and stuff so that you'd end up working at. They'll pay for you, and then you'll end up teaching after that, those particular institutions. The other thing that you can go to, and this is a really important thing, so this is the fourth thing that I would consider you to look at. And I never even thought about this, so this is why I'm mentioning it. But now that I have a little bit more experience, I would look into going to different countries, right? So I stayed in Canada, and I didn't even consider going to the United States. But that would have been a really viable option to consider American schools at the time. Because there's just so many more schools. The other thing, like I'm going and applying to different schools in the UK, so like Cambridge and Oxford, or the different ones in Finland, and there's places all over the world that are really well ranked, and you just look to see where they are. A couple, INSEAD, for example, it's a business school that's in France and Singapore, and they end up sending their graduates to really good places after that. They get into really top schools. So if you look at those particular schools, sometimes they're really good. The one in St. Gallen, University of St. Gallen, is producing very good graduates at this moment in Switzerland. So you can look at that. There's places all over the world you can look at that you can get these wonderful schools and they might actually have fully funded programs, or they will have fully funded programs that will, develop you as a wonderful researcher and scholar. The fifth thing that I think is, probably low on your list, but the odd person gets this that I've seen, is you can get private scholarships. So if you're doing something that is sort of related to industry somehow, you might be able to do like a little bit of consulting, which is quote unquote consulting, which is just, you're solving a problem for somebody else. And I know in other countries this is a lot more common, but in the United States and Canada, it's a little bit less common in graduate school. But I know I believe in Germany they do a fair bit of sort of industry collaboration that you might be able to get some of that stuff to pay for scholarships, right? And the last thing, and oh, by the way, I just wouldn't pursue that route very aggressively because very few people understand what you do in graduate school and doing a PhD. So you might be wasting your time. And it's just going to be you're going to have to go very aggressively unless you have a personal contact someplace. And that personal contact can sort of hook you up, right? The last thing, and I'd highly not recommend this unless you absolutely have to, this is the last sort of moment, is just working part-time and looking for sort of part-time work, which might be, and I'm not talking about anything that's very aggressively tough, right? But stuff that just allows you to live. So if you're sort of extended at the end of your PhD, what you can do is, if you're done your PhD, almost done your PhD and you run out of money, what you can do is look for like simple things like delivering pizzas at night, right? Or, something along those lines. Maybe it's driving Uber or, driving a cab for a little bit where you can get tips. Or babysitting is a wonderful one. Those kind of jobs where you can get tips, you can usually do okay. You make like $20 an hour, right? And that would be enough. And if you're doing that at night, that means during the day you can actually do some work, and actually get your work done. And at night you can make enough to survive to get through your PhD program. So that's all I wanted to talk about at this moment. Oh, by the way, the reason why I'm sort of discouraging that is because that could take away from actually doing research. So teaching is one sort of possibility lots of people do, but it does take away from doing research and the time that you can contribute to that. And that research is the thing that's going to allow you to actually get a job in the long run. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. If you like it, do give me a thumbs up. I do appreciate it, as well as do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I appreciate it so much. So anyways, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.